came first? The chicken or the egg? Did the universe have a beginning, and if so, what happened before then? Where did the universe come from, and where is it going?
Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time is an unlikely book to spend more than 3 years on the bestseller list. Making major breakthroughs in theoretical physics, it's captured the popular imagination of the world. In March 1990, Hawking came to Elstree Studios to help turn his book into a feature-length film. The complexity of his abstract ideas made this a daunting challenge. But the filmmakers had a further story to tell, of how Stephen Hawking overcame the chronic disability of motor neurone disease to become one of the greatest scientists of his age.
Well, Stephen Hawking is arguably the most famous scientist since Einstein. He, as a public figure, is as compelling as the book. In fact, probably more so. There's enormous curiosity and fascination with Stephen Hawking, the man.
What Hawking is very good at is actually relating our situation on a very small planet in a backwater of the universe to the larger questions of cosmic origins. And I think what we're trying to do with the film is to broaden that out a little bit and to see where some of the answers to these questions might lie.
I was told by a whole lot of people that this was impossible, that they couldn't imagine how you could make a movie from this particular book, and they certainly couldn't imagine what a movie would look like. But what appeals to me in filmmaking is the impossible. I wasn't particularly interested in making a movie that would just tell the story of astronomy from the Ptolemaic universe to the present time. I just had the idea that there must be some way, although I wasn't sure what way, to make something different out of all of this material.
It'll look different to a science documentary, and I think that's our main interest, to actually make something that gets away from some of the traditional ways of making these films, not because they're inherently bad, but because we have the opportunity with this one project to do something a little different.
I think that write a film the book, as it stands, would not work. Instead, what they will do is make a film about me and my work.
It's a story about Stephen Hawking's scientific efforts. It's a story about Stephen Hawking, without being clearly either. Well, whenever you take a book and you turn it into a movie, there's some kind of adaptation going on. And in the case of Brief History of Time, it's not as if we can hire actors and have them act out the various crucial scenes that animate the book.
Instead, Errol Morris is taking Hawking himself as a starting point, using him not as an interviewee, but as an icon within a detailed copy of his own working environment.
I'm amazed at the care they have gone to recreate my office at Cambridge in the studio. I'm sure most people wouldn't have known if they had used something completely different.
Have you made a literal reconstruction of this desert?
Pretty close.
Why?
Because we like the original. It was kind of striking to see this nice, cluttered, white, very busy-looking place, full of pictures of his family and his life and his awards and his books. And how he, even when now where he doesn't really need them, he still goes, gets up in the morning every day, he goes in there and he works in there. I mean, that's his choice. And obviously that's a very important part of his life.
24, take one. There are two objects of inquiry, Stephen and the world around him. And by shooting him in a very static and very deliberate fashion, where we keep approaching him from different angles, we are investigating him, maybe investigating the nature of who he is, of who we are, at the same time as we're looking out into the world and investigating the cosmos around us. Have visuals that take us back to the places where Stephen Hawking spent time. My thought at the moment is yes. I'm interested in the fact that Stephen Hawking seemed to spend his entire life in the middle of some form of Gothic architecture, whether it was St. Albans, Cambridge, or Oxford.
There's this man who grew up in practically a continuous Gothic environment. I mean, St. Albans, where he went to school, the school itself is in itself a Gothic castle, and next to it there's a Gothic church. And from there he goes to Oxford, and from Oxford he goes to Cambridge. So it's a man who spent his entire life in this 5-6 centuries old world.
Errol Morris is the only director who could make this film. I didn't know much about Errol until I looked at a tape of The Thin Blue Line. And this was about 8 or 9 months after we'd been developing the project. It became immediately clear that Errol had quite a unique way of filmmaking, and one that would fit this kind of project very well indeed.
Combining dramatic reconstruction, abstract images, and an unsettling Philip Glass score, The Thin Blue Line has obvious links with A Brief History of Time.
The whole nature of The Thin Blue Line is an investigation into what's out there. Case of that particular movie, this roadway, this north-south road in West Dallas, on which a police officer stopped a car and was shot and killed in November of 1976. I wasn't there. I don't know what really happened on that roadway. And The Thin Blue Line is an attempt to try to uncover whatever underlying reality there was. This is a much broader canvas, admittedly. We're asking questions about what's out there. What is the universe really like? What was the universe at the beginning of time, and what will the universe be like at the end of time? But the nature of the enterprise still is very much the same. It's an investigation into the nature of truth.
How real is time? Will it ever come to an end? Where does the difference between the past and the future come from? Why do we remember the past, but not the future?
To investigate the relationship between Hawking's life and his scientific discoveries, Morris builds up a pattern of memories from Hawking's friends and family. The film blurs divisions between documentary and feature filmmaking by conducting all the interviews on elaborate studio sets.
And what kind of a cox was Stephen? Could you talk about that?
The cox.
Yes, what kind of a cox was Stephen Hawking?
Stephen was a very good cox, but he was an adventurous cox, you see, and he would, if you went out with him...
There's a sort of rhyme and reason to the method that I've used in making these kinds of films with real people. I do my interviews first, in this case very stylized interviews that are done in a studio. And then on the basis of what people say, I start to put together the movie and decide what the other visuals might be.
But the question always to Stephen was, should we make him a cox at the first date or the second date, you see? Well, coxes can be adventurous, and some coxes can be very steady people, you see. He's rather an adventurous type. never knew quite what he was going to do when he went out with the crew.
He has an interviewing technique which brings out things from people which I don't think you'd get from any other director. It's a technique which doesn't depend solely on driving a story through the film, but he will take little tangents, throughout the film and explore those. And I think that's what interests us.
He complained that he felt he was losing control of his left hand.
What I've tried to do is collect a series of stories about Stephen Hawking and from Stephen Hawking that provide some clue to who he is and to the work that he's done.
He used to produce his work every week for tutorial, and as he never kept any notes or papers or that sort of thing, on leaving my room he would normally throw it in my wastepaper basket. And when he was with other undergraduates at the tutorial and they saw this happen, they were absolutely horrified because they thought he did this work in probably half an hour. If they could have done it in a year, they wouldn't have thrown it in the wastepaper basket, they would have put it in a frame up on their walls.
Stephen generously went off to buy the drinks and brought them over and put them down on the table. And as he put his pint of beer down, he spilt it. And I sort of said genially, oh, heavens, you're drinking it this time of day. And he then told me that he'd been in Addenbrooke's for 3 weeks, and they'd done a whole series of tests, and they decided what was wrong with him. And he told me very straight and flat that he was gradually going to lose the use of his body, that eventually only his heart and his lungs would still be operating, and his brain.
Before my condition had been diagnosed, I had been very bored with life. There had not seemed to be anything worth doing. But shortly after I came out of hospital, I dreamt that I was going to be executed. I suddenly realized that there were a lot of worthwhile things I could do if I were reprieved.
One of the curious things about this whole story is that the scientific publications, the great scientific publications, all follow the onset of the disease. Stephen Hawking became sick and then became the great scientist. Seeing him, talking with him, he's a person who is severely disabled physically, but a person who is still very, very much in command of his mental faculties, a person who is still a working physicist and is still making major contributions to the field. The fact that he's been able to do this, despite this illness, for the last 20 years, is heroic.
I think A Brief History of Time has been successful for a combination of reasons. One is that people want to understand the universe around them and to know where they come from. But I think that another reason is that the public wants heroes. They made Einstein a hero, and now they are making me a hero, though with much less justification. But I fit the part of a disabled genius. At least, I'm clearly disabled.
Stephen Hawking, his frailty, his mortality, in a way has become a symbol for, I think, everybody.
What's interesting, I mean, here's a wonderful contradiction. Here's the man who can't move, who goes on the greatest journey of all. Who goes on journeys into space and time that I mean, some of us can get up and we can maybe run for 8 miles in the morning, but we can't get near where this guy goes. The relationship of the music to the subject is a poetic one. It's not a precise one. It can't be a precise one. There is no precise relationship of music to any subject matter. It's what we make up. approaching this subject, so far what we've done, he's given me a list of words. And he said, well, here are some words I want you to think about. And the words like science, black hole, wheelchair, the whole list of words. And he said, just think about these and think about what your reaction is to those words. And so we're talking from a very poetic point of view. The kind of thinking that goes into the art making and theater making is not that dissimilar from the kind of thinking that goes into quantum mechanics and the far out cosmological theories. It's after all, we share a common time and a common ethos, and I think it's in a way it becomes understandable to us for that reason.
A particle does not have just a single path through space and time. Instead, there is an uncertainty principle, according to which both the exact position and velocity of a particle can never be known.
One of the nice things about making this kind of movie is that you don't always know where you're heading. There's an element of chance, an element of caprice, an element of exploration, of finding out what the movie actually is going to be about. I mean, I have one big obstacle right at the outset, is how you deal with abstract science in a movie for commercial distribution.
If you were watching an astronaut foolhardy enough to jump into a black hole at some time on his watch, say 12 o'clock, he would cross the event horizon and enter the black hole. But no matter how long you waited, you would never see the astronaut's watch reach 12 o'clock. Instead, each second on the watch would appear to take longer and longer, until the last second before midnight would take forever. Thus, by jumping into a black hole, one could ensure that one's image lasted forever. But the picture would fade very rapidly and grow so dim that no one could see it.
In Hawking's book, he uses a lot of everyday events as metaphors or to describe the concept, the abstract concept that he's trying to present. And I would guess that our role in the film will be similar, to take objects and images that people are familiar with in everyday life and use them as something from real life that will connect you visually with the sort of abstract ideas being presented.
It seems that Einstein was doubly wrong. The quantum effects of black holes suggest that not only does God play dice, he sometimes throws them where they cannot be seen.
A lot of it represents flights of imagination, people grappling with mathematics, with equations, with ideas, trying to construct models of the world around us that could be true, but also could be false. How do you picture the universe? How do you picture the birth and death of the universe? I mean, this is something that people have been describing and redescribing since really the beginning of time. And I opted for very, very simple diagrams.
We've done quite a bit of photography out of scientific books with massive equations of all the Greek and the mathematical formulas. Obviously, we aren't trying to tell the audience what the formula is all about in its every little detail. It's just to illustrate the sort of abstract world that these scientists live in and work in.
I think what you see in these scientists is that on a certain level, something mysterious happens. That it isn't just a question of adding up all the figures and coming up with an answer. That you have all the figures, and then they take a jump to something that is beyond the figures, and then they fill it in later. That was true for Einstein. I mean, he had intuitions about things. Then he had to figure out the mathematics afterwards. It's the intuitions that are so interesting.
All these theories, are they just the abstract creations of a group of crazy scientists running around who've created formula which may be pleasing to themselves but which are inherently meaningless? Or do these people really, in some deep sense, have their hands on the meaning of life and the meaning of the universe?
It always troubles me when I put a hot teacup next to a cold teacup. I've increased, by letting heat flow from one to the other, the amount of disorder in the universe.
For a non-scientist to read scientific literature, sometimes what you get is really the flavor of it. You get an idea of the level of the abstraction. You get an idea of what it's about. It might be difficult for us to re-explain it to somebody else, but the general area becomes opened up to us in a certain way.
The laws of science do not distinguish between the past and the future. Yet, there is a big difference between the past and future in ordinary life.
And what fascinates me is that borderline, that edge between reason and unreason in science, between the ordinary and the extremely far-fetched. And much of the material in Brief History of Time, of course, skirts that area. It's in that gray zone.
I began to wonder what would happen when the universe stopped expanding and began to contract. Would we see broken cups gather themselves together off the floor and jump back onto the table? Would we be able to remember tomorrow's prices and make a fortune off the stock market? It seemed to me the universe had to return to a smooth and ordered state when it recollapsed.
I've been involved in this project for a year and a half, and I've asked myself, why is Stephen Hawking such a powerful symbol? And what is he a symbol of? And I keep returning to the idea that we're all very fragile creatures, that we're all mortal. We all are born and die. And yet we have this capacity to ask these amazing questions about the world around us and even to expect answers. I like to think that the movie has captured something of the spirit of the book, something of the spirit of Stephen Hawking's quest, scientific quest for understanding. And part of what I would describe as our perhaps quixotic battle, our futile battle, to sort of possess and understand the universe, something that really might always be beyond our grasp. It's a movie about hope.
Then we shall all, philosophers, scientists, and just ordinary people, be able to take part in the discussion of why it is that we and the universe exist. If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason. For then we would know the mind of God.